Hello, my name is Sophia Terrio. I am a writer, musician, and creative, and today we're gonna talk about world building. Now, world building sounds like something only fantasy and sci-fi authors have to deal with, but that's not the case. Because even contemporary realistic fiction exists in a world. It just happens to be ours. Whether your world exists in our current reality or not, you will have to introduce it into your novel. Really, it's just the setting, and every book needs a setting, or else characters may as well be walking around in a void. The point is, you can't really escape this. But whether you're researching an existing place or making it up on your own, your book needs a world. So let's talk about how world building should be done in your novel and in your private authorial notes. Disclaimer, I am a fantasy author, I know, but I have written many a story on good old Earth, and I will continue to do so. Point being, I am not a stranger to world building in magical or realistic worlds, and this advice applies to any kind of writer. This is not a fantasy authors only kind of channel. So throughout this video, I will use two example worlds, one based in Earth with our main character Amanda, and one in a little more fantastical setting with our main character Bellamy. I want to show you how both kinds of worlds can be built within a novel. Now let's dive in. Now, I mentioned earlier, world building is just adding a setting, but there's a little bit more to it than that. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to define world building as constructing the immediate and larger cultural and physical landscape of your story. Now that's a lot to do. So let's start with the immediate surroundings. For this one, I've already come up with our main characters, and I'll use them to create their setting, starting with our contemporary story. Amanda lives in a small town in an apartment above a bakery. She has a cell phone she uses daily to chat with her friends and family. She goes to college across town, and she gets there by riding a bike. She uses a laptop, but can't afford her internet, so she spends most of her time downstairs at the bakery because the owner insists on changing the password every day, forcing Amanda to buy a coffee and a croissant just to use the Wi-Fi. Already we're starting to see some of what the surroundings look like. We have a college town with a bakery and a campus, and perhaps it's a bike-friendly place. We get that the cost of living is expensive because Amanda can't afford the internet bill, and that business owners are sometimes very protective with their Wi-Fi passwords that are not so free. Notice how all of these details pertain directly to Amanda. I'm in essence building the world around her. Sure, it's based in reality, maybe even a real-life town that already exists. So I'm not really building anything, but I'm constructing her world from the character out. Let's get into our fantasy setting. Our main character is Bellamy. She lives in a small town on the edge of the wildlands, sort of like a study abroad. She's staying with a family in their home while she studies for her magical botany degree. The wildlands are full of magical plants that she needs in order to complete her studies. The family's nice enough, but Bellamy can't afford the rent, so she often cooks, cleans, and nannies the children while the parents are working. Okay, so we're getting a few details. The setting feels rural, being on the edge of the wildlands, which I just made up. But we also know that both of these parents work in some capacity, and that magical botany exists. There's not a ton here about the magic of the world, but it's a ton about Bellamy's world. Remember, the story is about her, not the entire planet. So in both of these immediate settings, we get a piece of the character's lifestyle. We know they're both students, that they're not well off enough to afford everything they need, but that they have a way to get around it. Now, some of you may be thinking,
Wait. We know way more about the characters than we do about the world. I thought this was a world building video.
Well, that's the point. The reader only really needs to know what they need to know. By that, I mean the main character is the center of the entire universe because the story's about them. That's why they're the main character. Everything the reader knows should pertain to their story. A lot of authors, myself included, get caught up in making the this elaborate giant world with a 1,000-year-long history. And sometimes that's exactly what your story needs, but other times we try to shove random information into the story just because we know it. So now we know the only thing that belongs in the book, in its final form, are the things the characters and reader directly need to know. But if you're the author, you get to create and live inside the very established and detailed world. Maybe it doesn't matter to the character, but you know about a war that happened in this very spot 3 centuries ago, and your writing will be better off for it. Because even if the war doesn't directly come up, maybe our main character goes to meet someone at a memorial site. Or maybe it's the beginning of a history book that your character falls asleep reading. It's unimportant to the plot, but that adds the kind of detail that makes your world feel real and textured, in the way that our world is real and textured. I want to stress here that by real, I don't mean non-magical. I mean alive or believable. Let's get back to Amanda. Her small town exists on a dry riverbed that used to be a lake, but years and years ago, someone built a dam, and then they built the town. And even though the house exists because of the dam is harmful to the environment. Maybe a very endangered species of fish is being threatened by the existence of the dam. Maybe the bakery owner is grumpy and complains about people wanting to flood his shop, and that Amanda should cherish her croissant while she still can. See, the dam might never be removed during the story, and it has very little impact on the plot, but it's the kind of background information that suggests other people in this town exist and have their own lives. Just remember, Amanda is still the center of attention in the story. Here's a little hang-up. You're gonna know things that the reader never will, and rightfully so, but that's hard. As the author, you want to show the reader this rich and wonderful universe. You've done your research. Maybe you've made maps and genealogies and languages. The political landscape is fraught with intrigue and things happening that will change the world. And hey, if that's interesting to you, write the story about that. Write about a character who's deeply involved in politics and history and the grand picture. But Amanda, Bellamy, they're not. Their stories are smaller. So even though Amanda's bakery is very pro-dam, if the dam isn't a big conflict in her story, it isn't anything more than a little flavor to the background, random information that doesn't need to come up more than once or twice. I wouldn't do any more than that, because once you mention it too many times, it starts to become a subplot, and then you have to resolve it, or even get swept up in the literal or metaphorical flood. If you don't want it to be a subplot or a symbol, maybe only stick to a passing glance, or leave it out altogether. Every word counts in your novel, and you only want the things that are absolutely essential to be in there when it comes time to publish. I do think fantasy authors have the hardest time with this. We created the entirety of this world. We're proud of every little brick that we put in every little building, but the reader doesn't need to know about them. So let's look back at Bellamy. Bellamy's studying to be a magical botanist. Maybe magical botany is looked down upon by the magical community because it's considered pseudo-magic. But I'm not gonna force it into the narrative. It still might find its way there because, kids are mean, and one of the children might accuse her of being not a real mage because they overheard that somewhere. Or maybe the parents she's staying with don't get financial assistance from some educational fund for mages because magical botany isn't considered a magical degree. And just like Amanda's baker, that information could come up. It's part of the world, and the world informs the story in the same way that the story informs the world. If that's the story you're telling, if that's the world you're creating, that's all well and good. Just remember that every detail of your world that makes it into your story should relate in some way to the story. For example, as a magical botany student, Bellamy isn't directly involved in the politics or educational funding, but she might be affected by it. The reader doesn't need to know the identity of the person responsible for that legislation, or the history of the legislation leading up to it, because she's not going to interact with any of that. Sure, it affects her life, but it's not the point of her story. And I'm calling myself out too. It's really hard to be excited about a deep and rich history only to cut it out of the book. But unfortunately for us, this is what makes a memorable and rich reading experience. As much as we love building the world, and as necessary as it is, you're writing a story about a character. And like all my other videos, there is some wiggle room. As I always say, writing is an art, not a science. I do have a free guide on my website that will help you determine when to break these conventional rules and do something outside the box. You can find the link for that on my channel, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and comment for more on writing and world building in the future. If you want to use either of these worlds as a jumping off point for your own, please feel free. We didn't get into super detailed stuff here, so there's a lot of work still to do on your own, but at least it's a place to start. Also, I'm in the works of creating a Patreon that's gonna launch in the next couple of months, and I'll have more details on that later. If you want to become a member, you will have access to all of my free guides and the exclusive power to help me write forthcoming example sentences and stories like the two that I just used. I hope this world building advice helps you on your writing journey. You'll have to come back and follow my own advice. I will see you all next time. I post every other Friday, and with that, thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy writing!